Greetings, all. What a fascinating conversation you had last week with regard to Taylor's case and psychodynamic as well as cognitive behavioral therapy. As you know, her case has given you the opportunity to apply and compare and critique these two approaches. It's also important to be aware that this was an academic exercise. In practice, you'll have more choices in your toolbox, and you will most likely be tailoring your intervention approach to the particular needs of the individual client, much as individuals in the process of their recovery compose idiosyncratic toolboxes that assist them in maintaining their recovery. I want to highlight several things that were themes in your conversation and specific points as well. The issue of differential diagnosis is very important. As Dalen points out, it's important to acknowledge that she was able to function happily in Europe, and that indicates that her depressive disorder is not likely to be rooted in genetics, but rather more likely to be situational. In practice, as you all concluded, a combination of psychodynamic and cognitive approaches can be most useful. Insight is necessary, but not sufficient. As Lisa points out, Taylor does understand the connection between these childhood experiences and her problems with depression, etc. But this insight has not seemed to produce relief for her. As Michelle points out, she does understand the connection between childhood experiences and her problems. And similarly to what Lisa is saying, that is not enough. It's interesting the point that you made about self-awareness, and it sometimes leading to a situation in which the person is actually their progress is actually inhibited by attachment to their story. As you point out, perpetuating the confusion and the drama and the pain without finding a solution to live fully in the present. With regard to cognitive behavioral therapy, you underscored the very important point that there's a reciprocal relationship between thoughts and behaviors, and the importance of learning new problem-solving strategies, new ways to frame problems and develop problem-solving strategies. As Misty points out, even though Taylor is aware that her negative self-image and unhealthy behavior are rooted in her negative childhood experiences, that awareness needs to be linked with practical tools and skills so that when she notices her pattern of negative thinking, she has the tools to interrupt that pattern and replace it with more productive ways of thinking. You also discussed maintaining conditions. For example, her continued dependence on her father's financial support, creating an avenue for repetition of the negative relationship pattern with him. As you discovered in your conversation, psychodynamic and cognitive behavior approaches are not mutually exclusive. One thing that's interesting is that you mixed in a variety of other approaches. For example, Rogerian therapy, William saying it isn't clear that Taylor has someone in her life who has unconditional regard for her. And that is a Rogerian approach. You talked at length together about solution-focused therapy. For example, exploring the exception to the problem, focusing the conversation on exceptions, especially those exceptions related to what the client wants to change, and encouraging the client to do more of what they did to make those exceptions happen. And you mentioned specifically what was making her happy in the mountains, and you had various hypotheses about that. Was it the challenges, new stimuli? Myra asked, was it because she was independent and not reliant on her father for support? Was it because she wasn't subjected directly to his proximity and therefore his abuse? Was she able to create another support system? Tara mentioned, was it because she was independent and not reliant on her father for support? Dalen also wondered what was different about her time in Europe that allowed her to be happy, and how to identify that difference and see how it is tied in to her well-being. And then Mariah discussed the importance of considering medication and also the possibility of wilderness therapy. And Shayla's approach was more systemic. As you said, Shayla, all I could think about the whole time was connection, lack of connection, and community. In practice, what typically happens is a blend of therapeutic approaches that are tailored to the particular needs of the client. So insight is necessary. It's also necessary to identify thought patterns that may be obstructing well-being. It's necessary to identify maintaining conditions. For example, her financial dependence on her father. Unconditional positive regard is necessary. And focusing on solutions, exceptions to the problem, and how it's possible to move forward from the present. In addition to all of that, there's significant data that indicates that no matter what approach a therapist is using, the relationship between the client and the therapist is sometimes the most critical element in recovery. So this has been a wonderful conversation. You have really collaborated here in a very effective case conference, and I hope this case has allowed you to apply what you've been reading and integrating about psychodynamic and cognitive therapies, and think about those in a larger context. And I look forward to our next conversation.